You may have seen this story. David Edwards wrote about it over at Raw Story. Alternate picked it up. It's been going all over the internet about Jennifer Hensey, a medical marijuana user in Michigan, who told, well, quoting from David Edwards, who told a group of Michigan lawmakers last week that a drug task force raided her home and kept every belonging she owned, including her vibrator, even after a judge dismissed the charges against her. That's pretty astounding. And on the line with us is Kimon Freeman, and it's Kimon, right?
Yes, correct.
Hey, Kimon. Activist with Black Lives Matters here in D.C., award-winning playwright, program director of We Act Radio, 103.1 FM here in Washington, D.C., weactradio.com, dcferguson.org. And also, you guys have your Green Festival. It's happening on June 5th, this Friday. Do I have that right?
That's right, this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we're doing all we can to stop the merger between Pepco and Exelon, which is the nuclear power company that's trying to take over the municipal power company here in the nation's capital.
Great. And where can people hear about that?
Well, they can always get more information at greenfestival.org. Greenfestival.org.
Greenfestival.org. Okay, cool. And do we have Jennifer on? Oh, that's the next segment. She's going to be with us. Okay. So the militarized police here. Can we speak a little bit about the police taking and behaving in an overly military fashion, A, and B, taking people's stuff? This asset forfeiture stuff. What's the status of this? What's the status of the pushback on this? How are activists responding to this? You want to go off on this?
Absolutely. Obviously, this is just police brutality in yet another form. We're talking about billions in assets that have been seized without charge, And unfortunately, it's good to see this issue gaining traction in the media because, unfortunately, a lot of people would sit back and say, oh, well, in terms of Black Lives Matter movement, that doesn't affect them. Or in terms of, incarceration, that doesn't affect them. But if the general population knew that the police could take your assets without you being charged with any crime and keep those assets, I think this hits home. And again, it's another form of police brutality. And here in the nation's capital, it took on its most draconian form because in addition to all of this, D.C. required a penal sum, meaning that in order to contest this in a so-called neutral judicial review of the case, you would have to pay 10% of the values or whatever is seized, or $2,500, whichever is greater. And yes, absolutely. Here in the nation's capital, the home of democracy and no vote in Congress. But thank you to John Oliver from Last Week Tonight on HBO when he did a segment on this back in October, because Tommy Wells, of course, the outgoing councilman here in D.C., introduced the civil asset forfeiture law to repeal this. And it was successful. I'm happy to say that it was unanimously approved by the council. However, it only removes certain aspects of this. It was a much-needed reform, but it was definitely not an overhaul. It removed the penal sum that I just mentioned. It also allowed people to drive their cars during the adjudication, which, of course, that was not permitted before. But it doesn't stop the seizure. The key to this is that people should not have their property seized without being charged. That is the point that we.
Well, I'm wondering why people should have their property seized. Period. Unless it is the very specific property that is involved with the crime. I mean, if you catch somebody with a kilo of heroin, I got no problem with it being seized. Or for that matter, $100,000 that they're using to buy a kilo of heroin or whatever they sell for these days. I understand that. But to take their car, to take their house, to take her vibrator, I mean, I don't get that.
Well, absolutely. And I think that you are making an excellent case in terms of sanitizing language because there has been instances where someone going to a car auction, and many of those require cash. The guy shows up with $10,000 in cash to purchase the car. He's pulled over by the police. And they allege that he's involved with illicit activity, and the money gets seized, and it's a loss.
I remember when that happened. That was about a year ago, and basically the crime that he had committed was driving while black, if I'm remembering correctly.
Absolutely, the guy ended up, and there was a case where the guy lost his business as a result of this.
Wow.
So These are, again, instances of overreaching and forms of police brutality that Americans should take a long look at, because we need to definitely consider radical police reforms in the nation.
Yeah, and then not just police reforms. I mean, we're talking legal system reforms that allow police to do these kind of things as well. How disproportionately is civil asset seizure, forfeiture, whatever you want to call it, how disparately is this applied across racial lines?
Well, it's applied evenly. So when you look at the number of times people of color are pulled over or arrested, or that will reflect the same in terms of the seizures, because it's also a poor people's crime. When you take $500 from someone, they're not going to go hire a lawyer to try to reclaim that. So the people who are most exposed to this, who are people who are least represented in the American judicial system in terms of being treated fairly. So as you well know, people of color are underrepresented in terms of legal representation, proper representation, and having a real understanding of the laws that's been applied to them. Oftentimes, retroactively, because you can't explain to someone their rights after they've been violated. It's supposed to be the other way around. And unfortunately, people of color and poor people in general have really suffered the brunt of all of this.
We're talking with Kimon Freeman, weactradio.com, dcferguson.org, Black Lives Matter, and greenfestival.org as well for this weekend. Kimon, what is the state of activism to push back against this right now, and what can people do to participate in that?
Well, the activists are really on their heels right now, because this battle is on so many fronts that it's very difficult to try to get the messaging that really ties all this together. But one of my favorite African proverbs is that spider webs could tie up a lion, and so what needs to happen here now is that we need to make the message clear that this is just yet another form of police brutality. It's just another form of much-needed reforms, not only, as you so eloquently pointed out, in the police departments across the country, but also our judicial system across the nation. We're in much-needed of radical reforms in that regard, and it's just in terms of getting the right messaging that ties all this together. So we really thank you for pointing this out and giving the opportunity to speak to this on your show.
I wonder if we were to refer to this as theft by government,
Absolutely.
If that would bring along the Tea Party crowd as well.
Well, whenever I hear Tea Party, I always think about the Boston Tea Party, when they was actually engaged in criminal or illicit activity that was destroying assets and property, but not necessarily called thugs in a riot. So
right.
Make that known out there.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely, and I support it wholeheartedly, and I think that there would be a welcome addition in terms of addressing this monster.
Or maybe just rational conservatives who just don't like government being big, and the people who say let's abolish the IRS. Well, isn't the logic? I mean, they say taxes are theft. Isn't civil asset asset forfeiture theft also? Particularly when it's done in a venue where there actually is no crime. Right. So it's theft by government.
Sending billions of dollars in cash into a war zone in Iraq and it being unaccounted for and turning up missing is not called theft because it's done by the state. But having said that, I think that one of the things the ACLU and other forward-thinking organizations are looking into is how to implement large-scale ballot initiative reforms that can put it for a voting body
to get this out there.
Changes that we want to see happen.
Cool. Kimon, thanks so much for being with us today.
No problem.
Good talking with you.